Trust, at its core, is not a feeling. It's a cognitive judgment made over time based on repeated exposure to a person's behavior. When someone acts in a way that is aligned with what they say repeatedly and across different situations, we begin to develop a model of their character. And it's this model, not their charm, not their promises, that we rely on when we say we trust them. Trust is fundamentally about predictability. Without predictability, there's no foundation upon which trust can be built. In the workplace, this plays out in subtle but profoundly important ways. When a colleague consistently meets deadlines, speaks honestly in meetings, and maintains emotional stability, others begin to adjust their behavior around that person. They stop bracing for surprise. They don't need to over-prepare for contingencies. The environment stabilizes simply because one individual can be counted on to behave in a predictable, rational way. This is not merely a social preference. It's a psychological necessity. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We rely on the ability to predict outcomes in order to function. When someone in a workplace behaves inconsistently, it triggers a form of low-level stress in those around them. It forces others to dedicate cognitive energy to monitoring, interpreting, and compensating for that individual's behavior. That's wasted energy. It erodes collective focus. Predictable behavior isn't boring. It's officials that you understand the rules of the system you're operating in, and that you respect the people within it enough to act with integrity. Predictability is a form of moral signaling. It tells others that your values are stable, your word has weight, and your actions align with what you claim to believe. This fosters a sense of psychological safety, which is one of the most crucial elements of high-functioning teams. What makes this even more critical is that trust, once broken, is disproportionately difficult to rebuild. People don't forget betrayal, but more importantly, they don't forget unpredictability. If your actions vary without explanation, if your mere standards, your responses shift without cause, others begin to view you as unreliable. And that judgment, once made, stains every interaction thereafter. It becomes embedded in their expectations of you. Consistency in action over time is the only mechanism that reliably shifts someone from suspicion to trust. It's not earned through words or through isolated instances of excellence. It's built through patterns. And patterns require time to emerge. You cannot shortcut this process. 100 promises kept matter far more than one made with enthusiasm and broken in silence. Reliability is not glamorous, but it is powerful. Moreover, trust formed through predictability breeds autonomy in others. When people trust their co-workers to deliver, they delegate more freely. When they trust their leaders to be fair and consistent, they focus more on their work and less on organizational politics. Trust frees people from unnecessary vigilance. It grants them the confidence to act without needing to look over their shoulders. All of this implies something uncomfortable but true, that the responsibility to be consistent lies squarely with the individual. It is not a shared task. It is not a democratic function. Each person must earn the trust of others through deliberate, repeated action. And they must do so even when it's difficult, inconvenient, or unrewarded in the short term. People often wait for the grand moment, the opportunity to impress, to shine, to prove themselves once and for all. But the truth is that trust, reputation, and competence aren't forged in dramatic gestures. They're built in the quiet repetition of small, often unnoticed actions. The workplace, like life itself, runs on the accumulation of patterns. And those patterns are created, sustained, or destroyed what you choose to do each day when no one seems to be watching. Saying, "I'll get it done," and following through every time, even when it's inconvenient. This is a small action. Responding to emails in a timely manner. Being on time for meetings, taking responsibility for a mistake without needing to be confronted. These are all small actions. None of them make headlines. None of them invite applause. But repeated enough, they create a person others feel they can rely on. And that's what defines trusting, not the promise of potential, but the history of reliability. This is not a sentimental idea, it's behavioral reality. Human beings are wired to detect patterns, to respond to cues, to notice discrepancies. One instance of follow-through might be appreciated. 10 begin to establish a rhythm. 100 form a reputation. And once that reputation forms, it precedes you. It walks into the room before you do. People begin to adjust to you based on that accumulated impression, whether it's of someone dependable or someone erratic. There's a moral dimension to this too. Small actions taken seriously represent a commitment to order. They signal that you take responsibility for your role in a system that depends on mutual reliability. Inconsistent people often believe that their talents or intentions compensate for their lapses in discipline. But systems don't run on good intentions, they run on execution. And execution is, by its very nature, made up of small acts done with care again and again. When you neglect small responsibilities, you invite chaos in disguise. A missed deadline here, a skipped detail there, it may seem trivial in isolation. But what's being communicated is that you're not attentive, or worse, that you don't care. And over time, this compounds negatively. Trust erodes quietly. It doesn't collapse all at once. It leaks through the cracks created by neglected micro-decisions. The inverse is also true. When you consistently show care in the details, when you follow up, keep your word, stay organized, you generate compound interest in the trust others place in you. It becomes easier for people to delegate to you, to listen to you, to support you. They don't have to wonder if you'll show up. They already know. And in environments where cognitive load is high, that kind of certainty is rare and valuable. In this way, the small is not separate from the large. It is the foundation of it. People who focus on mastering the basics build a platform from which larger responsibilities can be trusted to them. Promotions, leadership, influence. These don't appear out of nowhere. They are often the byproduct of someone having proven, over time, that they can handle the small things with integrity and consistency. There's a discipline to this that is unglamorous but indispensable. You don't get credit every time you complete a routine task, nor should you. That's the point. The compound effect of small, responsible actions doesn't work because each is recognized. It works precisely it doesn't need to be. Over time, the invisible becomes visible, and the unnoticed becomes the standard by which you are judged. Chaos is not always loud. It doesn't always arrive with warning or violence. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as unpredictability, inconsistency. When people say one thing and do another, when expectations shift without reason, when standards fluctuate based on mood. This is one of the fastest ways to introduce disorder into a workplace. People cannot function effectively in a system where they don't know what rules are being followed from one day to the next. When leaders are inconsistent, the problem is amplified. Employees spend more time managing the volatility of their supervisor than doing their actual work. One week a mistake is ignored, the next it's punished harshly. One day input is welcomed, the next it's dismissed. That volatility becomes a psychological burden. People begin to play defense. They start hiding errors instead of solving them. They stop asking questions. They stop thinking creatively. Survival takes precedence over performance. But inconsistency doesn't only come from leadership. It festers at every level of an organization. When team members are unreliable, when coworkers change their tone, availability, or follow-through based on convenience, tension builds beneath the surface. It may not be voiced aloud, but it shows up in passive behavior. Missed deadlines, unspoken resentment, withdrawal from collaboration. This is how teams silently fracture, not through conflict, but through erosion. From a psychological perspective, humans have a deep need for structure. Our brains are pattern-detecting machines. We are constantly scanning our environment for consistency because it allows us to predict and plan. When a person or system is inconsistent, it violates this predictive model. It triggers stress responses. You can't plan for irrationality, you can only brace for it, and that bracing wastes energy, attention, and time that could be directed toward actual tasks. Over time, inconsistency communicates something deeper than incompetence. It communicates disregard. It suggests that your behavior is dictated not by principles, but by impulse. That the people around you must adjust to your instability instead of relying on your judgment. This creates a toxic feedback loop. The more others sense volatility, the more defensive and self-protective they become. And once people feel unsafe, they stop contributing in meaningful ways. Workplace culture is not defined by slogans or mission statements. It's defined by what actually happens. If behavior is inconsistent, no matter what values are written on the wall, the culture will become one of cynicism and disengagement. People begin to believe that nothing they do really matters because outcomes are no longer tied to effort. Rewards become arbitrary. Recognition becomes political. And in that environment, good people either leave, or worse, they stay and stop caring. Inconsistency also damages accountability. When standards fluctuate, no one knows where the line is. And when no one knows where the line is, it becomes impossible to enforce it. Feedback loses meaning. Expectations become negotiable. You cannot hold someone to a shifting target. You cannot correct behavior that hasn't been clearly defined. What results is a kind of bureaucratic paralysis. Rules exist, but no one believes in them, and therefore no one truly follows them. This decay of order doesn't usually come from a single catastrophic event. It comes from 1,000 little breaches, each one seemingly insignificant. A missed meeting here, a vague response there, a changed decision with no explanation. Each instance teaches others that clarity is optional, that structure is negotiable, and that truth is flexible. And once that lesson is learned, it's nearly impossible to unlearn. Competence is often praised as the ultimate workplace virtue. It's easy to understand why. Skill, intelligence, and technical ability are all visible, measurable traits. A competent person can solve problems, generate results, and elevate the performance of a team. But competence alone is not enough. If it's not paired with consistency, it becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability, regardless of talent, is inherently destabilizing. People often confuse excellence in bursts with reliability. But someone who can perform at a high level intermittently is not someone you can depend on. They may deliver exceptional work one day and disappear the next. They may solve a crisis with brilliance, then ignore basic responsibilities for weeks. This kind of volatility undermines any advantage their skill might offer. Others are forced to compensate, to prepare for the unpredictability that trails them like a shadow. In the short term, people often tolerate this. High performers are given leeway, especially if their work is difficult to replicate. But over time, the cost becomes too high. Team members begin to resent having to carry the load during the down cycles. Managers begin to lose patience with the constant justification. What once seemed like genius begins to feel like a liability. The inconsistency erodes confidence, and with it, the perceived value of the competence itself. Psychologically, humans don't trust erratic patterns. We're built to find comfort in regularity. Even a less talented but more consistent team member will often inspire more trust than a brilliant one who is unpredictable. That's because trust is not just about output. It's about emotional reliability. Can this person be counted on when it matters? Can we plan around them? Can we rely on them under pressure? These questions are not answered by competence alone. In high-stakes environments, consistency is what creates safety. When roles are clearly defined and performance is stable, teams can coordinate with precision. But introduce even one inconsistent person into the system, and everyone else is forced to recalibrate. Meetings become about managing uncertainty. Processes shift to account for potential disruption. This burns time and energy that should be directed towards solving real problems. Competence without consistency also affects leadership credibility. If a leader demonstrates brilliance but lacks discipline, followers are left in a state of uncertainty. Morale becomes volatile. People begin to imitate the inconsistency, assuming it's acceptable. The organization takes on the personality of its most erratic high performer, and once chaos is normalized, it's extraordinarily difficult to restore order. There is also a moral problem embedded in inconsistency. It signals that you only choose to be excellent when it suits you, that your competence is wielded as a tool of convenience rather than responsibility. This creates a perception, not always voiced, but deeply felt, that you cannot be relied upon when things are hard, when the work is thankless, or when discipline is required. Over time, this perception turns into distrust. Even the most talented individuals must understand that excellence isn't just about what you can do at your best. It's about what you choose to do consistently. Without routine, discipline, and follow-through, competence is a flickering light hue, occasionally bright but ultimately unreliable. In environments where others depend on you, flickering is not enough. Leadership is not defined by charisma, titles, or the ability to command a room. Those may be useful tools, but they are superficial. True leadership is rooted in routine. What a person does habitually under both pressure and calm, the integrity of that routine determines how much others are willing to follow. People don't trust what you say in a meeting. They trust the patterns you live by when no one is looking. A leader who acts on principle consistently and predictably brings order to the environment. They show up the same way every day, not in mood, but in responsibility, tone, and presence. This steadiness allows others to orient themselves. Just as a ship needs a fixed point for navigation, a team needs a leader whose behavior provides a reliable reference. Without it, direction becomes unclear, and small uncertainties begin to snowball into systemic disarray. Routine in leadership is not mundane, it is foundational. When a leader checks in regularly, responds to issues with measured judgment, holds the same standards across time and people, and stays committed to processes that work, they provide something rare: psychological safety. People stop wondering what version of their boss they're going to get today. That stability frees them to focus, to create, to take risks without fear of erratic consequences. The integrity of a leader's routine also extends to discipline. Leaders who enforce rules only when it's convenient, or who excuse certain behaviors based on favoritism or emotion, create a culture of confusion and resentment. But those who are predictably fair, even when it costs them, earn a reputation for being just. That kind of leadership builds loyalty not out of fear, but out of respect. People will accept hard decisions if they believe those decisions come from a stable, principled place. Repetition is often dismissed as uninspiring, but repetition is what builds trust. A leader who listens every time someone speaks doesn't just seem polite, they build a legacy of attentiveness. A leader who always gives feedback on time doesn't appear efficient, they cultivate reliability. These habits, repeated, become the infrastructure of a team that knows what to expect. And when expectations are clear, performance improves without force. Leadership without consistent behavior becomes theater. Impressive in moments, but hollow over time. The team sees through it quickly. They begin to adapt their behavior not based on principles, but on mood detection and guesswork. They stop investing in shared standards and start focusing on personal survival. The leader might still feel in control, but the system underneath them is quietly fracturing. In times of crisis, the leader's routine becomes even more vital. People look not for dramatic declarations, but for familiar patterns: a calm voice, a steady schedule, a transparent process. These signals communicate control, not because the leader has all the answers, but because they haven't abandoned their discipline under stress. That is when leadership is tested. When the storm arrives and the routine holds. Without integrity of routine, leadership becomes an unstable force, fluctuating with emotion, external pressure, or personal inconsistency. What remains is not order, but turbulence disguised as authority. Teams lose trust not because of one decision, but because they can no longer anticipate how decisions are made. You are what you repeat. Over time, your actions form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your identity in the eyes of others. It doesn't matter what you claim to believe or what intentions you declare if your behavior contradicts those claims. In the workplace, consistency is how people begin to understand who you are. It is not your resume or your charm that defines you, but the habits you live by every single day. Identity is not an abstract concept, it's functional. It tells people how to relate to you. If you consistently act with integrity, people begin to see you as principled. If you're always late, they see you as careless. If you speak with honesty regardless of circumstance, you're seen as trustworthy. These aren't labels you get to assign yourself. They are conclusions others draw from what they observe over time. You are building your identity in real time through repetition. Inconsistent behavior sends a mixed signal. It confuses those around you. One moment you're disciplined and professional, the next you're dismissive or unreliable. People don't know which version to trust, so they begin to trust neither. This ambiguity weakens your presence. It deletes the strength of your character because others can't form a coherent model of who you are. Identity, in this sense, is not formed by exception, it's formed by pattern. This is especially critical in leadership. If your team sees you behave differently depending on who's in the room, they won't see integrity. They'll see manipulation. If your values shift under pressure, they won't see adaptability. They'll see opportunism. The consistency of your behavior across time, environments, and audiences is what makes people believe that your character is real, that it's not just a mask worn for convenience. People don't trust fluctuation, they trust alignment. When your stated values match your daily conduct, others begin to calibrate around you. They know how to approach you, how to work with you, how to rely on you. That alignment becomes part of your entity, an operating manual others can read without guessing. It creates relational stability, which in turn fosters collaboration, accountability, and respect. Even your smallest actions are identity signals. How you respond to stress, how you treat subordinates versus superiors, how you handle feedback. These all reflect something deeper than behavior. They reveal principles, priorities, and internal structure. And once people start to recognize those principles through consistent action, they no longer need constant explanation. They already know what kind of person they're dealing with. Inconsistency, by contrast, suggests a fragmented identity. It communicates that behavior is reactive, not grounded, that decisions are made in isolation, not according to a coherent internal framework. This is not merely inefficient, it's unsettling. In a professional environment, people want to know where others stand. They want to know that decisions aren't based on shifting emotion or hidden agendas. Consistency provides that clarity. Over time, consistency becomes a kind of narrative. It tells a story that others follow consciously or not. It's how reputations are formed and how professional legacies are built. And that narrative, once established, begins to operate independently. It either opens doors or closes them. It either attracts responsibility or invites skepticism. And it all starts with the daily, repeated choices that silently declare who you are. Trust is not merely a feeling of comfort or rapport. It's a psychological contract. It's the internal agreement people make about what to expect from you based on your behavior over time. This contract isn't written or verbalized, but it governs nearly every professional relationship. When someone trusts you, it means they've come to a cognitive conclusion. You will do what you say, you will uphold certain standards, and you will not betray those expectations without cause. Every interaction either reinforces or weakens that contract. When you show up on time, follow through on commitments, speak truthfully even when it's inconvenient, you strengthen it. Each of these behaviors is a small fulfillment of an unspoken promise. And because trust is built incrementally through repetition, its development is gradual. But this gradual nature also makes it fragile. One broken expectation may not collapse the contract, but several. This psychological contract is deeply tied to a sense of fairness. People operate with internal models of what they owe and what they are owed. If they give effort, they expect respect. If they meet standards, they expect others to do the same. When someone consistently violates these unwritten agreements, ignoring deadlines, shifting blame, changing expectations without warning, they aren't just seen as incompetent, they're seen as dishonest because they've broken the moral logic of reciprocity. In the workplace, this breach has consequences beyond the immediate task. When people feel the psychological contract has been broken, they begin to disengage. Not always dramatically, sometimes subtly. They contribute less, speak up less, take fewer risks. Their willingness to go above and beyond diminishes, not out of laziness, but out of self-protection. Why invest energy in a relationship that no longer feels safe or fair? What makes this even more important is that the psychological contract is rarely renegotiated explicitly. If expectations shift, they must be communicated clearly. If a mistake is made, it must be acknowledged directly. Otherwise, silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity invites resentment. People fill in the blanks, often with the worst possible assumptions. Left unchecked, this deteriorates not just individual relationships, but team cohesion as a whole. Leaders especially must be mindful of this invisible contract. Their words carry more weight. Their inconsistencies reverberate farther. A single moment of perceived betrayal, a broken promise, an unfair decision, a failure to defend a team member can rupture years of accumulated trust. The contract, once broken, does not automatically repair itself with time. It must be consciously rebuilt, often with more effort than it took to establish in the first place. Even among peers, this contract is essential. Colleagues rely on each other not just for task completion, but for emotional predictability. Trusting someone means you don't have to watch your back constantly. It means you can speak openly, disagree honestly, and rely on shared standards. Without that trust, communication becomes guarded, collaboration suffers, and people retreat into self-preservation. At its root, the psychological contract of trust is about mutual recognition. I see that you take this seriously, and you see that I do too. That mutual recognition keeps teams functioning under pressure, what allows for honest feedback, and what sustains morale when things go wrong. It's not idealism. It's the minimum requirement for any professional relationship to function over time. The workplace is not separate from society. It is a condensed version of it. It contains all the elements of civilization in miniature and rules, roles, hierarchies, shared goals, interpersonal tensions, and the constant negotiation between order and chaos. How people behave at work reflects how they would behave more broadly under pressure and conflict and within structured systems. It's a test site for character, discipline, and cooperation. Just like civilization, the workplace requires a set of norms to function. These norms are rarely enforced through force. They are sustained by mutual agreement. People show up on time, meet deadlines, communicate respectfully, and uphold their duties, not they're constantly supervised, but because they recognize the necessity of shared structure. Break those agreements often enough, and the structure begins to unravel. That unraveling mirrors what happens in broader society when trust in institutions fails. Rules and routines give shape to behavior. They create predictability, which in turn enables productivity. Without these constraints, chaos takes hold. Projects collapse, accountability disappears, and fear takes the place of focus. This is no different from a failing institution or lawless environment. The same psychological forces are at play: fear of betrayal, erosion of trust, and the paralysis that comes when no one knows what the future holds. Leadership in the workplace operates as a local form of governance. A competent, principled leader models justice, enforces boundaries fairly, and holds themselves to the same standards as everyone else. A corrupt or erratic leader creates a climate of uncertainty and dysfunction. In this way, management becomes a small-scale version of statecraft. The decisions made by those in power ripple through the system, shaping morale, efficiency, and culture. Colleagues, like citizens, are bound together by unspoken agreements. They expect reciprocity, fairness, and contribution to the shared mission. When one individual consistently violates those expectations, through laziness, dishonesty, or selfishness, the impact spreads. It demoralizes others, creates conflict, and encourages similar behavior. The same dynamic exists in any society. If one person cheats the system without consequence, others will eventually follow. Conflict resolution in the workplace is also a reflection of societal mechanisms. Do people escalate problems immediately? Do they suppress and avoid them? Or do they engage in dialogue, compromise, and corrective action? The answers to these questions reveal how well the social fabric of the team has been maintained. Just as in civilization, peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the result of disciplined negotiation and shared restraint. Workplaces that function well tend to reflect the values that support a stable society: personal responsibility, transparent communication, respect for boundaries, and the willingness to delay gratification for a larger goal. When these values erode, dysfunction emerges. Office politics take precedence over substance. Fear replaces initiative. People begin to retreat into individualism rather than working toward collective success. Understanding the workplace as a microcosm of civilization isn't merely a metaphor. It's a framework for responsibility. Every meeting, every interaction, every decision is a small-scale test of the principles that allow groups of people to live and work together peacefully. You are not just an employee or a manager. You are a participant in a social contract that either upholds order or invites disorder. Through the consistency of your actions,